Today I'm going to tell you about a dark episode in Pablo Escobar's empire, a betrayal that marked an irrevocable before and after. A dazzling woman named Isabella dared to play with fire, secretly allied herself with the Cali cartel. But what happened next left everyone stunned. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Distrust was born in the midst of paradise. It was March 1989, and the sun's rays filtered through the tall tevas of Hacienda Napoles, casting shifting shapes over the marble pathways that Escobar had once ordered built. The warm air of the Magdalena Valley carried distant roars of lions and the splashing of hippos in an artificial lake, while the intense perfume of tropical flowers mingled with the smoke of the Cuban cigars that El Patron loved so much. Pablo strolled slowly through the gardens of his refuge, hands clasped behind his back, wearing a white linen shirt open at the chest from the heat. His dark, ever-watchful eyes surveyed with pride every corner of the world he had built from scratch. At 40 years old, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was the most influential man in Colombia. According to Forbes, he ranked among the top 10 wealthiest individuals on the planet. Patron, interrupted a voice. It was John Jairo Velasquez, alias Popeye, his head hitman, approaching with confident steps, his boots echoing on the ground. Miss Isabella has arrived. She's waiting on the main terrace. Pablo nodded calmly, faintly smiling. Isabella Restrepo had entered his life months earlier at one of the lavish parties he hosted at his estate. She was 28, elegant in beauty and refined in manners. She hailed from a traditional Medellín family that had lost its wealth during the 1980s economic crisis. Her golden skin, emerald green eyes, and mysterious smile had fascinated the most feared trafficker on the continent from their first encounter. "How did she arrive?" he asked as they walked toward the house. "In the silver Mercedes you gave her. She came alone as always." Pablo paused briefly, gazing at flamingos feeding near a pond. In recent months, Isabella had become much more than a lover. She was his confidant, the woman with whom he shared his thoughts, frustrations, and plans. She'd been present at key meetings. She'd met important figures in the organization, and he had begun trusting her, as he did only with his cousin Gustavo Gaviria. "Popeye," Pablo said without breaking his gaze at the birds, "have you noticed anything different about Isabella lately?" The hitman furrowed his brow, analyzing the question. Ever adept at reading his boss's tone, Popeye sensed an unusual tension when Isabella was mentioned. "In what way do you mean, Patron?" he asked. "The question she asks, her interest in our movements, the routes, contacts in Cali." Pablo turned to him with eyes intense enough to disarm the most feared. "Yesterday, she asked me details about the shipment we have planned for next Wednesday to Miami. She said it was out of curiosity." A chill ran down Popeye's spine. In their world, out-of-place curiosity could mean the difference between breathing or not, between success or a deadly ambush. "Do you want me to investigate, Patron?" he asked. "Not yet," Pablo replied, resuming his walk toward the terrace. "But stay alert and have some of our men nearby while we talk today." As they approached the house, Pablo recalled the previous night in his apartment at the Monaco building in Medellín. Isabella had arrived late, which was unusual for her, and seemed nervous and distant. When he asked how her day had gone, she answered evasively, saying she'd met friends at the Club Campestre. Later, when Pablo called to arrange a meeting with one of the members there, they informed him that she hadn't been seen there for weeks. The main terrace of Hacienda Napoles was an architectural gem, rivaling Europe's most luxurious mansions. Carrara marble columns supported a vaulted ceiling painted with frescoes by Italian artists. Large windows offer an impressive view of the artificial lakes, where hippos moved slowly, and beyond them, the airstrips housing 3 private planes and a couple of helicopters. Isabella stood by the balustrade, taking in the vista. She wore a white silk dress that highlighted her golden skin tone. Her brown hair fell in gentle waves over her shoulders. Upon hearing Pablo's footsteps, she turned with that smile that had captured the most feared man in the country. "My love," she said as she turned to kiss him. "How are you? You seem thoughtful." Pablo wrapped his arms around her, but remained on guard, analyzing every move, every tone in her voice. "Just work stuff, Reina," Nothing you need to worry about. They sat on Cuban-made wicker furniture decorated with elegant mime decor, while servants served Scotch whiskey aged 30 years and French-inspired canapés from Pablo's hired chef. The sky began to be painted with golden and pink tones as the sunset created a romantic atmosphere that contrasted with the doubts emerging in the drug lord's mind. "Pablo," Isabella said after sipping her drink, "my sister Carmen told me the situation in the city is very tense lately. She says there's concern about rumors of war between you and others." Pablo's eyes hardened. Isabella rarely spoke about cartel affairs, and when she did, she was discreet. This direct question seemed out of place. "Those are just rumors, love. Nothing more." Pablo observed her closely. "Why does that worry you now?" Isabella lowered her gaze, nervously toying with the edge of her dress. "You know, Carmen works at the bank. She told me she's noticed suspicious financial movements recently. Large transfers into accounts in Valle del Cauca. She's worried. She thinks if things get complicated, the whole family might be affected." Pablo leaned back in his chair, pondering what he had just heard. Valle del Cauca was a rival cartel's stronghold, and indeed Carmen Restrepo worked at Banco de Bogota, one of the country's major banks. But Isabella speaking so casually about confidential banking data triggered all his alarms. "Did Carmen give you specific information about those transactions?" he asked innocently, though never breaking eye contact. "No, nothing concrete," she replied quickly. "She just said the amounts were enormous, millions of dollars." With a smile meant to deflect suspicion, she changed the topic. "But I don't want to keep talking about unpleasant things. Tell me, how is your mother? I haven't seen her in a while." Mentioning her Milda Gaviria struck a sensitive nerve. Pablo's mother was untouchable to him, and few had the privilege of sharing moments with her. Isabella had attended some family dinners, and her Milda had shown clear affection for the young woman. "She's fine, thank you for asking." Pablo paused. "In fact, she plans to come to the hacienda next Wednesday for San Jose celebration. It'll be a very private gathering, with just our closest people." As he said this, he never took his eyes off Isabella. For a split second, he noticed a flicker of curiosity in her eyes, quickly replaced by sweetness. "That sounds lovely. I'd love to be there to receive her properly. Of course, my reina, it'll be a pleasure to have you with us." But Pablo knew there was no event planned for that Wednesday. It was a trap, a lure to confirm his suspicions. If Isabella was sharing information with the Cali cartel, soon she would act to disrupt the supposed movement, exposing the betrayal. As the conversation shifted to harmless topics, Pablo remained vigilant, observing every gesture, every nuance in Isabella's voice with the instinct of a hunter. Years surviving Medellin streets had made him an intuition master, an expert in detecting betrayal before it materialized. The sun had disappeared completely when Isabella announced she needed to return to the city. Pablo walked her to her car, the silver Mercedes-Benz he had given her for her birthday. He kissed her on the lips without revealing the storm brewing in his mind. When her vehicle disappeared among the trees lining the road toward the main highway, Pablo already had a clear next move. Popeye called while lighting one of his precious Cuban cigars. "Put discreet surveillance on Isabella. I want constant tracking day and night. Find out everything. Who she sees, where she goes, what she does when she's not with me." Then he exhaled a thick cloud of smoke, staring into the void. "I have a feeling someone very close is playing with fire," he added coldly. "And if I'm not mistaken, she's about to find out why nobody, absolutely nobody, betrays Pablo Escobar and lives to tell the tale." The smoke slowly rose into the starry sky of Antioquia. In the distance, among the dense foliage, a jaguar's roar, a wild, ancient sound, echoed, as if announcing the storm approaching Medellin. Pablo Escobar had built his empire on 3 unbreakable values: loyalty, respect, and fear. And when any of those pillars was threatened, his reaction was always the same: swift, ruthless, exemplary. If Isabella Restrepo truly betrayed him, she would soon experience firsthand the consequences. Her name was spoken in fear in Medellin's darkest alleys and the most powerful salons of Washington. The hunt had begun, and in this game, only one would survive. The trap was closing in. 3 days had passed since that conversation at Hacienda Napoles, and Pablo Escobar had hardly slept more than a couple of hours at a time. His intuition, sharpened by years surviving poor Medellin barrios, insisted something was terribly wrong. From his private office in the Monaco building in Medellin's upscale El Poblado sector, he watched the gray dawn sky through bulletproof windows. The penthouse apartment was another proof of his absolute dominance. The walls were adorned with originals by artists like Botero and Picasso, while imported leather furniture and handmade oriental rugs evoke an elegant, controlled luxury. Yet even that privileged view from the 22nd floor couldn't calm the unease weighing in his chest like a persistent shadow. The subtle sound of the door opening interrupted his thoughts. Popeye entered with his characteristic stealth, moving like a silent hunter. He carried a manila folder that seemed to contain truths too heavy to bear. "Patron," he said, placing the envelope on Pablo's desk. "We have the surveillance report." Pablo slowly extinguished the cigar in his fingers and reached for the folder. His fingers, adorned with thick gold and diamond rings, trembled slightly as he opened it. What he found on the first page confirmed his worst suspicions. The initial image showed Isabella leaving an elegant cafe in Medellin Center, the same day she had told him she would be at home resting. The second photo captured her in very close conversation with a man in a dark suit whom Pablo immediately recognized. Fernando Ineo, one of the Cali cartel's primary financial brains. When were these photos taken? Escobar asked in an almost imperceptible voice. "Yesterday afternoon, Patron, between 2 and 4. Our photographer got close enough to record part of the conversation." Pablo turned the page. There he found a partial transcript of the conversation. The words seemed to leap from the paper directly into the pit of his stomach like daggers. "There will be no family gathering on Wednesday. It's just bait. Pablo suspects it. We must move the operation forward to Thursday." Pablo's fists clenched in fury. Not only had she betrayed him, but she'd understood the trap and warned the enemy. "Is there more information?" Pablo asked, though he sensed the answer would bring more anger. Popeye nodded seriously. "We've tracked her for the past 2 months. She's met with Ineo on at least 6 occasions. We also have indication she's been at a safe house in Envigado, believed to house part of Cali Cartel's intelligence team." Pablo stood and walked to the window. From that vantage, Medellin stretched before him like a three-dimensional model of everything he had built. Every zone, every street, every building had meaning in his domain. And now a person in whom he'd placed his trust had betrayed him for the enemy's money. "How long has she been receiving money?" he asked without turning around. "According to our banking sources, about 4 months. Always small amount deposited into different accounts to avoid suspicion. For months, a month before she appeared in his life. Everything had been coldly calculated from the start. The charming, cultivated woman he met at a party had been sent to seduce him and extract information." Pablo returned to his desk and picked up his special phone, used only for top-secret matters. He dialed a number known by only 5 people. "Gustavo," he said when his cousin answered. "We need to meet now at the usual place." "Problems?" asked Gustavo. "Serious ones," Pablo replied, and hung up. The usual place was a discreet estate outside Medellin belonging to a landowner who collaborated with the cartel for years. That site served as a hideaway for extremely sensitive meetings. An hour later, both cousins were seated on a rustic terrace, surrounded by birdsong and the strong aroma of freshly made coffee. Gustavo Gaviria, nicknamed El Leon, was not merely the cartel's number 2. He was the brother Pablo never had, the only human being he trusted without reservation. When shown the images and transcript, Gustavo was speechless for several minutes, grasping the magnitude of the betrayal. "This is worse than we imagined," he finally said gravely. "If they have such precise data about our operations, they may be preparing something big, an orchestrated raid or strike." Pablo nodded in silence. "That's why I want Isabella dealt with in a way that sends a clear message to Cali, and to anyone else thinking of switching sides. Are you absolutely sure, cousin? If we go through with this, there's no turning back. Isabella has ties to powerful families and relationships in high social circles. Her death will make national headlines." "Exactly," Pablo interrupted with a glacial look that would shake decorated military officers. "I want it to be an example, Some mothers tell their children the story of Isabella Restrepo as a warning. Gustavo fully understood his cousin's logic. In the narco world, showing weakness was almost as deadly as a bullet. How do you want to proceed? Gustavo asked. Pablo leaned back in his chair, gazing at the mountains surrounding Medellín, while forging in his mind a punishment that would leave an indelible mark. I want it to be shocking, impossible to ignore, he said after a pause where cruelty and strategy intertwined. And I want her to understand exactly why she's going to die. Where? Gustavo asked, tone dry. The Caribbean shopping mall is far too enclosed. We need an open space where authorities can't fully control the narrative. Then Pablo smiled, the same smile that always preceded his most ruthless decisions. The Ateneo Hear Our Thoughts Stadium. This Sunday there's a match between Nacional and Millonarios. Over 50,000 people. Gustavo shivered. His cousin planned to turn Atletico's temple into the stage for a public execution. The impact would echo from the poorest barrios to the halls of power in Bogotá. We'll have to bribe a lot of people. Stadium security, police organizers. Money's not a problem, Pablo replied. And those who don't accept it, well, they know money or bullets. That phrase had become the cartel's unofficial motto. She knows something, no doubt. Pablo added. She called this morning as if nothing happened. Talked about Sunday's match, excited since she'd never been to the stadium. I told her it'd be unforgettable. Gustavo knew his cousin all too well. That tone left no doubt. Compassion was no longer part of the equation. Isabella Restrepo had dictated her sentence the moment she chose to betray the most feared man in Colombia. How many men do we need? Enough to control the stadium for 5 minutes. After that, we vanish as if we'd never been there. Pablo stood, ending the conversation, and make sure TV cameras capture everything. I want every household in this country to see what happens when someone dares betray Pablo Escobar. They both knew they were about to carry out one of the most savage acts Medellín would remember for generations. In the world they inhabited, compassion was not an option. Cruelty wasn't just a tool. It was a necessity for power, survival, dominance. Sunday was approaching, and with it, a lesson that would be seared into the nation's conscience. Isabel Restrepo had crossed an invisible line. She had played with fire and was about to discover that Pablo Escobar was not merely a man. He was a blaze that devoured anyone who dared challenge him. Over the mountains of Medellín, the clouds gathered like heralds of a storm that would be both natural and human. Isabella's fate was already written. And that Sunday, 50,000 people would become unwitting witnesses to the absolute power of a man who no longer knew limits. Friends, if this story about betrayal, power, and punishment during the darkest days of Colombian drug trafficking has gripped you as much as we love telling it, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell. Your support allows us to continue rescuing these stories that marked an entire generation. And believe us, you won't want to miss a single second of what's about to happen. Sunday, March 26, 1989, the Ateneo Hear Our Thoughts Stadium rose like a modern cathedral amidst the urban chaos. 50,000 voices merged into a single roar. Fans of Atlético Nacional, dressed in green and white, packed the stands. The air was thick with excitement, arepas, cigarette smoke, cold beer, and a soccer field energy that felt like oxygen. Pablo Escobar watched from the presidential box, smiling, impeccable. He wore a navy blue Italian cut suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. To the public, he was the benefactor of the poor, the man who built stadiums and gave away homes, a popular saint disguised as a politician. At his side, Isabella shone, dressed in red, confident, smiling. It was her first match at Medellín's most important stadium, and her excitement was as real as her ignorance of the fate awaiting her. What she didn't know was that at least 20 hitmen were scattered throughout the crowd, strategically placed, each with a single mission. Do you like the atmosphere, my love? Pablo whispered. It's wonderful, she replied, thrilled. I never imagined football could feel like this. Pablo smiled, speaking to her about the stadium's history and local passion. But in his mind, every gear of the plan turned with surgical precision. Minute 30, first half. The stage penalty was already choreographed. Meanwhile, the stadium's sound system, quietly modified during the week, was ready to broadcast a voice that would silence 50,000 throats. The TV cameras, carefully manipulated, already knew where to focus. Popeye, Pablo murmured into a hidden microphone in his lapel. We're ready. All in place, Patron. The cameras, too. Pablo took a deep breath. He had loved Isabella more than many others. Their conversations about art and philosophy had made him feel human, if only briefly. But in his world, affection was weakness, and weakness was paid with life. Isabella, he said, softly taking her hand, I want you to know these months meant a lot to me. She looked at him, puzzled. Why do you sound like you're saying goodbye? Pablo, is something wrong? I was just thinking how essential trust is when you truly love someone. Then it happened. The referee pointed to the penalty spot. The stadium erupted in screams and gestures. All of Medellín roared. And in that exact instant, Pablo stood up. His voice flooded the stadium from every speaker. Ladies and gentlemen. The crowd fell into an unnatural silence. 50,000 heads turned toward the presidential box. Isabella tensed. Something in her face shifted. Panic. My name is Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, he declared. And today, in this temple of football, we will show Colombia what betrayal costs. The cameras focused on him without blinking, and on Isabella's face, now contorted in terror, becoming the center of the spectacle. She tried to stand, but it was too late. Just then, two men dressed as security agents appeared behind her, firmly placing their hands on her shoulders. The stunning woman beside me, Pablo continued, with a calm that violently contrasted the absolute panic that had gripped the stadium, is Isabel Restrepo. For half a year she shared my intimacy, knew my most private thoughts, earned my trust. A disturbing murmur began to spread. Several tried to stand, but quickly realized all exits were blocked by armed men. What Isabel didn't know, he paused with dramatic tension, is that I always find out the truth. And the truth is that this woman has been leaking confidential information about my movements to the Cali cartel, all in exchange for a few pieces of silver. Isabel tried to speak, but terror left her mute. Tears streamed uncontrollably down her face as she realized the abyss she'd fallen into. Pablo pulled out an enlarged photograph from his coat, calmly holding them up so the cameras could capture each one. In these images, he said, she's seen meeting with Fernando Anal, operator for the rival cartel, on at least 6 different occasions. And not only that, in audio recordings, Isabel reveals details about transport routes, key dates, and the locations of our safe houses. A deathly silence engulfed the stadium. You could hear the wind whistling between the seats. Across the country, millions followed the broadcast in disbelief. Pablo turned to Isabel with a voice that suddenly took on a near-paternal tone. Do you have anything to say before you receive what you deserve? With almost superhuman effort, Isabel managed to speak. Pablo, I made a mistake. They forced me. They threatened to kill my family if I didn't cooperate. Your family, Pablo repeated with a smile that froze everyone's blood, has been safe, enjoying life in Miami for 3 months. The Rodriguez Orihuelas sent them there with false identities and suitcases full of cash. Isabel's final lie was exposed to the entire nation. There had been no coercion or blackmail, only unchecked ambition. The ambition of a woman who thought she could manipulate Colombia's most feared man. Pablo made a small hand gesture. High above the stadium, a sniper who had patiently waited till the first half adjusted his scope. In the world I exist in, Pablo continued, his voice booming like it came from a throne, betrayal has only one consequence. And that consequence must be public. It must leave a mark. It must become a living warning to anyone who contemplates turning their back on me. Isabel broke into sobs, unable to control the fear consuming her. She finally understood there would be no mercy, no escape. Every tear, every expression of terror was captured by the cameras and broadcast across the nation. It was a clear warning to the Cali cartel, to the government in Bogota, and to anyone who dared to defy him. Pablo raised his right arm to the sky. I am Pablo Escobar, he declared, and no one, absolutely no one, betrays me and lives to tell about it. Without changing his expression, he slowly lowered his arm. The crack of the gunshot echoed like thunder through the stadium. Isabella's body collapsed instantly. The red of her dress blended with the blood, as life drained from her in front of 50,000 people and millions of viewers. The silence that followed was more overwhelming than any scream. Not a single voice was heard, not a single movement from the stands. Even the players on the field stood frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Pablo approached Isabella's body, gently closed her eyes, and whispered a prayer in Latin he remembered from childhood. Then he stood up and looked directly into the cameras. "You may continue the match," he announced, unshaken. As the stadium staff removed the body without fuss, Pablo remained in his box. He stayed for the remaining 60 minutes of the game, occasionally waving to the crowd as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. No one dared move until he chose to leave. When the match ended in a 2-0 win for Nacional, a result no one would remember, Pablo exited the stadium, escorted by his most trusted men. The streets of Medellín, normally bustling on a Sunday afternoon, were eerily empty. The news had spread like wildfire. That same night, Pablo returned to Hacienda Napoles, settled into his favorite spot on the terrace, and watched as the hippos slid peacefully through the artificial lake. For the first time in days, he felt that everything was in order. He had sent a message that no one would dare ignore. In Cali, the rival cartel's leaders held an emergency meeting to rethink their strategy against Escobar. In the capital, President Cesar Gaviria received urgent reports recommending increased national security. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., DEA agents reviewed protocols to protect their informants. Pablo Escobar had transformed a soccer stadium into a stage of unquestionable domination. Isabel Restrepo, now become legend, would be remembered as a symbol of betrayal and its price. And all of Colombia once again understood why Escobar was the most feared man in Latin America. The silence in Medellín that night wasn't born of respect. It was born of sheer terror. A silence forged by the knowledge that a single man could annihilate lives, defy governments, and shake an entire nation without blinking. If this unforgettable scene shook you as much as it did us while narrating it, we warmly invite you to join our community of subscribers. Your support is vital so we can continue investigating and telling these intense, dark chapters of history. We know this finale was harrowing, but what happened in the stadium wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new phase. That afternoon changed the rules of the game forever. Join us as we explore how this brutal act of vengeance altered Colombia's power balance. Welcome to the next chapter, The Price of Terror. 6 months after that bloody Sunday at Ateneo Girardot, the aftermath of Isabel Restrepo's public execution had completely reconfigured Colombia's narcotics landscape. In his private office inside the cathedral, the luxury prison built following his surrender, Pablo watched in silence as the country became unrecognizable. The fortified prison nestled in Envigado's mountains embodied the contradiction Escobar represented in 1991. Though officially listed as a prisoner serving a sentence for drug trafficking, in practice the cathedral functioned like a private club from which the capo continued to run his vast criminal empire. Inside were unimaginable luxury for a prison. Football field, nightclub, bar, restaurant, suites with amenities that made 5-star Bogota hotels pale in comparison. Patron. Popeye's voice interrupted his thoughts as he entered the office, visibly both proud and alert. "We have the final report on stadium events." Pablo lifted his gaze from the dossier, a meticulous intelligence report on internal movements within the Cali cartel, compiled via his infiltrated sources. Since Isabel's death, recent months had seen a whirlwind of strategic victories and emerging threats that transformed his position in the global narco chessboard. "What do the numbers say?" he asked calmly, lighting his usual cigar. Popeye laid documents across the mahogany desk. Positively, dozens of high-ranking members of the Cali cartel had defected. About 40 requested meetings with us recently. Fear works, Pablo noted with a faint smile of satisfaction. The execution of Isabel was a clear, powerful message. That brutality caused terror among our rivals' allies. Many decided it was safer to switch loyalties and face a similar fate. That meticulously calculated violence resulted in a significant expansion of his power and influence. But on the downside, the government is under unprecedented international pressure. Popeye said in a lowered, serious tone. The Americans are furious. The DEA tripled its presence in Colombia and is demanding President Gaviria take stronger action against us. Pablo leaned back in his leather chair, absorbing the news. The public execution of Isabel wasn't confined to Colombia. Recordings crossed borders and aired on global networks. CNN, BBC, and other major outlets displayed the images worldwide, cementing Pablo Escobar as a symbol of Colombian horror on a global scale. "What else?" he asked, sensing the most complicated part of the report remained. The Restrepo family has hired the country's most influential lawyers. They're pushing to classify this as a crime against humanity. They also have backing from international human rights groups. Pablo cracked a sarcastic smile. The same family that had accepted Cali cartel money while their daughter acted as a spy now stood before the world as innocent victims, seeking public sympathy and government contacts. And there's the real problem, Patron. Popeye continued. Some politicians who used to be on our payroll are now distancing themselves. Some have even begun collaborating with authorities to clear their names. Pablo stood and approached the window overlooking the Aburra Valley. Medellín sprawled beneath him like a living model of his empire, each neighborhood narrating a conquest, each building proof of dominance. "You know what's curious about all this, Popeye?" Pablo said without turning around. "Isabel was just a low-level informant. If I'd wanted to eliminate her quietly, I could have, and no one would have known. So why turn it into a spectacle?" He slowly turned toward his lieutenant. His eyes flashed with cold calculation and unwavering resolve. "Because I needed to send one clear message. That Pablo Escobar is no ordinary trafficker. I am an unstoppable force. I decide who lives and dies in this land." Popeye had heard his boss speak of power many times, but this time there was something different in his tone. Pride mixed with sorrow, as if wrestling with not just strategic consequences, but also the emotional toll. "Do you regret anything, Patron?" he asked. Pablo remained silent for a long moment, staring out the window as if searching inside himself for an answer. "Regret? Not exactly," he finally said. "But I've come to understand an essential truth about the cost of absolute power." He reached for a hand-carved minibar and poured 30-year-age scotch. It was only midday, but his mind sought a liquid reprieve. "When I executed Isabel in front of thousands, I wasn't just punishing betrayal. I was declaring that I no longer abide by the laws of men, that I operate on a plane above mortal rules." "And it worked," Popeye affirmed. "Now they fear me more than ever." "Yes, it worked," Pablo repeated, sipping his whiskey. "But I also became something else. Before the stadium, I was Pablo Escobar, the capo. Afterward, I became Pablo Escobar, the monster." The difference was subtle, but to him, it was an abyss. He knew he'd crossed a line of no return, not only in the world's eyes, but in his own. "What was the real price of what I did that Sunday?" "What price, Patron?" "My humanity," he murmured, slowly extinguishing his cigar. That confession came from someone who'd ordered thousands killed. But that day in the stadium, he realized he'd become more than a criminal. He became a shadow even he could barely face. Still, voices were interrupted by the telephone chime. Popeye answered, and after a brief call, turned to Pablo with a serious expression. "It's our contact in Bogota. President Gaviria just approved new legislation. Terrorism charges carry stiffer sentences, and the immediate extradition of drug lords to the U.S. is authorized." Pablo cracked a bitter smile. "See that? Every action has its consequence." His show of absolute power triggered a state response now threatening his entire operation. The cruelest irony. In proving he was untouchable, he unleashed forces that could destroy him. "So what now, Patron?" Pablo returned to the window, gazing at the mountains that cradle his fortified prison and, beyond, the city that watched his transformation, from petty street thief to most feared criminal in the Americas. "Now, Popeye," he said, "we do what we always do. Survive, adapt, and remember that in this business, if you're not willing to pay the highest price for power, you become someone else's pawn." The sun began to set behind Antioquia's peaks, painting the sky the same scarlet hues that had drenched Isabel Restrepo's dress months ago. Pablo Escobar had shown the world his cruelty knew no bounds, but he also realized that unchecked power comes with an inevitable bill. Isabel's story ended that night in the stadium, but the repercussions of her death would follow him to his final breath. The man who once dreamed of becoming the protector of the poor ended up as the face of fear, a transformation as definitive as the bullet that sealed the fate of the woman who dared betray him. In the narco universe, Pablo won the game, but in doing so he lost something irrecoverable, the chance to be remembered as anything more than a monster. This cruel tale isn't meant to satisfy morbid curiosity, but to pose deeper questions. Was such ruthless punishment just? Would you have had the courage or coldness to act the same? Was it strategic genius, or the delusion of a psychopath? Some will say he defended his empire like any leader. Others will say he crossed the border, separating man from hell. The truth is there are neither heroes nor villains here, only decisions that reshape the country's destiny forever. If these real stories from the world of narco-trafficking grip you as much as they captivate us, subscribing is more than a click. It's a vote of confidence in content unafraid to reveal the truth. While other channels sell fiction, we bring you the unfiltered reality, a nation that lived under the shadow of a man who chose to become a legend. Want more sleepless tales? Colombia's history holds even darker secrets, and only you can decide if we should keep uncovering them.